We got Roy, Den, Hollander.
Oh, good. I want to talk to this guy.
Yeah, Jimmy turned us on to what Roy's all about. Roy, welcome to the Opie and Anthony show, my friend.
Thanks for having a serial anti-feminist on your show. I appreciate it.
Well,
Is that what they're calling you?
you were in the Post or the Daily News yesterday about suing Columbia University for the women's studies programs.
Right.
Now, let me ask you too, because I thought this was interesting. You've sued nightclubs for ladies' night because of they're saying they're charging men more, and you're also you're suing for the Violence Against Women Act. You're calling it unconstitutional for allowing alien females to acquire citizenship by falsely accusing their American husbands of mistreatment. So, what is exactly driving you with this?
I'm sorry, say that last.
What is exactly driving you with this?
What's driving me is justice. I'm tired of having my rights violated. I'm tired of seeing this society, which for the last 40 years has been bending over backwards or perhaps forward, to give girls preferential treatment at the expense of the rights of men.
Have you gotten anywhere legally with it? Like especially with the one thing. My first instinct was I like the fact that the ladies' nights, because basically men allow that just to get the broads in to get them drunk and fuck them. So it's almost to our advantage to have a ladies' night. But it always kind of annoyed me that they have it. Have you gotten anywhere with that?
No, all the cases are pending. What happens when you bring a case of this nature is the first inning is the opposition, the defendants, make motions to dismiss. So in the ladies' nights, the motion for dismissal was made. I filed my papers, and there's been no decision on that.
Okay.
In the Violence Against Women's Act, I am presently putting together my papers to oppose the government's dismissal motion. So there's obviously no decision on that yet. And on this women's studies program, it just started.
Well, Roy,
I'd like to go back to ladies' night.
Okay.
Think of the amount of money that is transferred from the pockets of guys to the pocketbooks of girls over all that time, and then you determine the present value of that. And also in New York City, when I go out to clubs, I generally find probably a 50-50 mix of girls and guys at clubs that charge girls the same. But at ladies' nights, there's usually more guys.
Okay, and let me ask you too about before we get to the Columbia thing, which I think I agree with you on. The Violence Against Women Act. I mean, look, there is obviously. Are you saying that the idea is unconstitutional because it says women in it? Because I almost don't mind this one. Because let's be honest, I mean, common sense dictates that in domestic violence cases, it's almost always a guy hurting a woman. I mean, what is your
Who mouths off?
Well,
I'm not saying she wasn't lippy.
That's really untrue. I mean, I can't. There's some studies that were done by the Department of Justice, and there's an organization called Radar, which have a lot of papers on that. And what it comes down to, domestic violence is just about equally between the girl and the guy. However, the girl, in 70% of the time, uses a weapon, as opposed to a guy might use a weapon in 20% of the time.
What does the case say of how many? What kind of statistics do you have on how many women were killed by the violence of a spouse or an ex-spouse, or how many men were killed by the violence of an ex-spouse? I think you can find that it's much more in one direction.
In that, and when you're talking about, and that's what I was going to get into, when you're talking about the injuries that result. More girls are injured by a guy, husband, or boyfriend accosting them than vice versa. But I think it's not as much as you may think. I think it may be, say, 60-40. So 60% of the girls are seriously injured, and 40% of the guys are seriously injured. So if you look at some of the studies, you'll see it's different than the common sense impression. But concerning the women's studies program, the problem with the program is that it is giving a benefit to females, and it's not giving a similar benefit to guys.
Which is what?
Well, the benefits are, it's not just, the women's studies program is not just courses. It's also networking, it's finding jobs, it's finding, support and help in all different areas. Now, that is geared towards females. So think of women's studies as the varsity sport of campus co-eds, and then compare that to what Title IX of the Education Amendments have been doing to varsity sports for men. Title IX says if you have a varsity sport for men, you have to provide the same opportunities for the females. So you have a varsity sport, or actually an educational program, because Title IX also applies to educational programs of women's studies, which primarily benefits females.
Well, I agree. I don't know whether to agree with you or disagree with you in a weird way, because I do agree with you on something like at Columbia, especially, they have like black female study, all these things that are obsessively focusing on a gender or a race or both, and it's perfectly acceptable. However, if you focused it, and I know I'm not saying we need white people study, but if you focused it negatively on a gender or a race, they wouldn't allow it. But because you're focusing it in a way that they deem ideologically acceptable, they allow it.
Well, I've come across that argument, well, what about black studies? And my response to that is quite simply, when was the last time a feminist was lynched? Shot dead on the front stoop of her house or on the balcony of the motel she was staying in?
Well,
let me just finish.
Okay.
There's no comparison. For the past 400 years, the institutions of this nation have kept their boot heels on the back of the necks of blacks. During that same time, white feminists and the average white girl have received nothing but preferential treatment.
You mean the same race of people that are now ready to step into the presidency, it looks like? Jesus Christ, dude. No, I'm not buying that argument. I think if you're against this female studies thing, then black programs like that, black studies, it's the same hypocrisy and the same discrimination as these women's programs. You're giving preferential treatment based on nothing but race. Yep. And why should people that are not getting that benefit have to make up for this 400 years of a boot heel, like you say, being on the neck when we never did anything? You're talking about ancient history.
And don't forget, women were not violently kept down the way, but women, in fairness, their rights were not equal to that of men for hundreds of years. Maybe it wasn't 400 years and they didn't face the lynching and the violence, but it was 300 years and they were certainly not given the same rights or the same treatment under the law or the same pay.
You're right. They didn't have a right to be drafted and sent to Vietnam. 52,000 American men died, eight females. They didn't have the right to go in and work in those sweatshops for the robber barons during the 1800s.
No, but they also fought for the rights to work.
You're right. They were discriminated against. But was the discrimination beneficial to them or harmful? Was the discrimination based upon prejudice or not? They were discriminated against, but not to the extent that blacks were.
Maybe not. But, okay, so what you're saying is that they should allow black studies because they suffered a 9, and women's studies shouldn't be allowed because they suffered a 5.5 or a 6.
Yeah, where do you draw the line?
Yeah, what's your exact barometer?
I would draw the line at that, because black studies is not an ideological or belief system. It's history that was previously ignored by America.
It's agenda. It's so agenda-driven.
It's very agenda-driven. Come on, man. You can't deny that certain types of colleges that have racially oriented courses are not agenda. They call them history revisionists. I mean, sometimes it's right to revise the history, and other times it's just putting a negative slant on what was already said.
Yeah, well, I don't have a problem with that. I don't have a problem with a group of people distinguished by the color of their skin coming up with their own history. That's not what I have a problem with. You never hear coming out of black studies lunatic syndromes that the females use to murder the unborn, murder newborn, murder their husbands, murder their boyfriends, murder their children, and get away with it or receive minimal punishment. You never hear that coming from a black studies. Someone saying,
really, like the fact that William Kunstler,
black, I should get away with this murder.
Really, like the fact that William Kunstler tried to use black rage as a defense for Colin Ferguson.
William Kunstler was the one aberration, which always happens.
But there's
the rule.
Black studies programs have been under a lot of scrutiny and gotten a lot of criticism because a lot of their speakers, their guest speakers, some of the professors have come out with some outlandishly, horribly racist remarks. And like I said before, it's very agenda driven. I'm not saying all of them. I'm sure there are some nice groups that get together and want to talk about history. But to say that it's different than the women's studies and any less or any more
inappropriate or dated,
it's kind of silly.
Your constitutional rights.
What's that?
actually, it's not appropriate or inappropriate. It's violating your conscience.
However you want to phrase it, whatever semantics you want to use. Okay,
That's
fine.
not semantics. That's what the lawsuit's based upon. Well, I disagree with your take on that. I think women's studies programs are fundamentally different, and they.
Okay, so you think it should based on gender bad, based on race good?
No. Well, first of all, I don't use the term race because there is no such thing as race.
Yeah, of course
what you're
there
really
is.
talking about is a differentiation in color of skin. There hasn't been another.
No, you don't think
semantics.
You don't
semantics.
think you obviously.
Semantics.
Wait a minute. You don't think there are cultural differences between different people of different like I'll use the word races that are based on things other than just skin color?